This video was made possible by our sponsor, EARGASM high-fidelity earplugs. Of the Trees is quickly becoming one of the hottest artists in the bass music scene, but his journey as a producer spans back over 15 years. In order to better understand how Of the Trees came into his current success, we need to take a look back on the origins of the project and follow the breadcrumbs of his long career. Of the Trees, legally known as Tyler Coombs, grew up in the small city of Portland, Maine. In a 2022 interview with MP3 Mag, he said that his relationship with music began with his love for heavy metal. As a kid, his friend taught him how to play the guitar and exposed him to bands like Slipknot and System of a Down. Tyler was immediately hooked, and he even included a list of all of his favorite Norwegian metal bands in his 8th grade yearbook bio. He still uses his metal roots as an influence in his current music, as he has been quoted saying, "A lot of metal music is super conceptual. There's a lot of lore and storytelling attached to it. What I love most about consuming music is when I can look at an album cover while listening and can enter this very fantasy-inspired world. Metal music does just that, and I wanted to tap into that with my music, but more hip-hop bass." As Tyler went on to high school, his musical palette expanded into hip-hop and electronic music like dubstep, Infected Mushroom, as well as some psychedelic music. It was around that same time that he got his first taste of producing, which he spoke about in a 2015 interview with Lost in Sound, where he said, "A friend of mine in high school bought a MIDI controller keyboard and he had a copy of Reason. He always wanted to produce dubstep, that certain brand of American dubstep that became a thing, but he didn't have the patience to try it out. So I would just go to his house for hours and make rap beats, kind of as a joke. Then I got a copy of Reason for my own computer and got my own MIDI keyboard. My music got progressively heavier based on the music trends that were prevalent at the time, and it eventually became something that I wanted to put out on the internet. I mean, I put my own EP out years ago. I'm not sure if you can even find it anymore. It's called Jupiter. It's definitely lost to the abyss, but I put it out myself using Reason and a shitty $80 keyboard, and people liked it. I made the right connections and started to get more of an online presence, and it just went from there. So I did my best to try and hunt down the Jupiter EP, but I didn't have any luck outside of just finding some artifacts of it. So I don't know exactly what point it was released, but if anyone does have access to that EP, let me know because I'd love to check it out. But anyway, after graduating from high school, he attended community college in Maine for a year, but he dropped out with the goal of turning music into a full-time gig. He started to teach himself how to play the keyboard, and he also got a job as a line cook to support himself in the meantime, and started playing small shows around town. In a 2024 interview with Polestar, he revealed that his first show was, quote, "in the basement of some punk kid's house with an estimated 20 people in the audience." Eventually, he started releasing originals and remixes on SoundCloud, the remnants of which can be found way back on his Of the Trees Facebook page. Not much later, he landed his first manager named John Hicks, who was also the talent buyer for Great North Festival, which took place in Tyler's hometown of Portland, Maine. Now with a manager on board, he had the opportunity to get more live exposure, as he was championed by Great North in his early years, with his first performance at the festival being in 2012. He also quickly became a somewhat regular act in his hometown venue, Port City Music Hall, opening for artists like RJD2, Tycho, Figure, and the Polish Ambassador. He also played at some other local events that year, like Kabang Music Festival in Bangor, Maine, and I also found some record of some sort of show or festival that he performed at in 2012. It's unclear exactly what it is, but he was on the lineup alongside Wu-Tang Clan, which is some crazy lore. Making the jump to play on bigger stages meant bigger sound systems to flex his sound design, which also means a greater need for hearing protection. Before we dive deeper into Of the Trees' backstory, let's take a moment to discuss this topic, which is hugely important to all live music fans. If you've ever been to even a single concert without hearing protection, then you're at risk of permanent hearing damage and tinnitus. That's why today's video sponsor, EARGASM, is here to help. I always use a decibel meter app on my phone when I'm at concerts, and most shows clock in around 105 to 110 decibels, sometimes more. Which means that without hearing protection, permanent damage would occur in less than 10 minutes. So imagine the permanent damage being done to your ears when they're exposed to live music unprotected for hours. And if you're one of those people that likes to stand by the speakers, the damage can occur in less than 1 minute. EARGASM sent me a pair of their high-fidelity earplugs to try out, and I was highly impressed with the clarity of the music when using them, which was a huge step up from the disposable earplugs that I had used for so many years. They have a 16 decibel noise reduction rating and can go up to 21 decibels in some cases, which is the perfect amount to keep your hearing protected without making everything sound muffled. They were also super comfortable and didn't bother me in the slightest, even after leaving them in for a few hours. The connector cord that comes with the Essentials bundle is also super handy, as it allows you to hang them around your neck when you're not using them. Plus, all EARGASM earplugs come with a compact keychain container, so you can take them with you wherever you go. They also come with 2 different sizes, just to make sure that they fit your ears perfectly. EARGASM offers a variety of colorways, plus some other unique models like the customizable clicks and the attention-grabbing ear lights. So if you'd rather not hear nonstop ringing for the rest of your life and would like to enjoy live music for decades to come, then EARGASM earplugs are the perfect solution. Use code AUDIO10 through the affiliate link in the description for 10% off your next EARGASM order. Now back to the video. Landing a manager, a busy schedule of gigs at Port City Music Hall, and a few festivals weren't the only big things that came in 2012. Of the Trees and his manager made their way to Austin, Texas for South by Southwest with an Of the Trees set for the Womp Bass Showcase, which was also his first performance outside of Maine. It was there that they met Jesse Breda, the founder of the record label known as Gravitas Recordings. Gravitas signed his first 2 EPs, which were released the following year in 2013, the Threshold EP, followed by the Vacation Land EP. That year he made his second appearance at the Great North Festival and played shows in surrounding states, further solidifying his place in the local scene. He also started his first attempt at a record label, and I'm not talking about Memory Palace, but we will talk about that later. This one was called the Whiskey Club, started by him and a fellow artist known as Gator, which was their way of showcasing local New England artists, pushing the hip-hop bass fusion sound. The collective ran for a few years, but eventually fizzled out. Moving on into 2014, his notoriety within the scene slowly began to rise, giving him bigger opportunities like opening for Zed's Dead and Cone Sound, as well as playing a set at Alex Gray's Chapel of Sacred Mirrors. As his success grew, new music releases continued, including a remix for Zion I, plus his Selections mixtape, which went on for 4 volumes. However, the most important release of that era came in late 2014 when he remixed Symbionic's track One Thing, which featured Christina Soto on the vocals. The remix itself didn't garner too much attention, but it did catch the ear of Bass Nectar, who was in the height of his career at the time. Bass Nectar remixed the remix, and it made the cut for his 2015 album Into the Sun, which gave Of the Trees notable exposure to Bass Nectar's large fan base. Bass Nectar also shouted out Of the Trees on Twitter, which showed him the power of the platform, so it spurred him to be more active on his own Twitter account, where he remains pretty active still to this day. I certainly wouldn't say that this was Of the Trees' top career-defining moment, but it definitely was a big leap at the time in his ongoing journey. Of the Trees spoke about this by saying, "I feel like I've broken into a much wider market. My media presence is gaining a lot more traction, people are starting to take me a lot more seriously. People are coming out of the woodwork, I'm meeting a lot more people, the connections are going insane right now." By this point in his career, he was doing music full-time, but according to his 2015 Lost in Sound interview, he didn't consider himself a professional just yet. Moving forward, he continued to release music, including a single called Pixel Drop, as well as another single on Gravitas called Bad Acid, plus a release on Wakan in the early days of the label, but I can't find the specific track. The only remnants of this track that I could find was from a 2016 Raver Rafting interview where a Wakan release is mentioned with no track name. Of the Trees spoke more about working with these labels in that same interview where he said, "They're both awesome. Gravitas has stood behind me forever, and working with them at this point is like using one of my limbs. Everything is streamlined, and they know my abilities so well and are always reaching out to me." Wakan has really got their footing this year, and it's awesome to see what it has become in such a short time. They're both really freeform, and neither caters to a strict sound or genre, but in some ways there are a lot of distinctions you can hear in their releases that tie the whole movement all together. So at this point in his career, he was still working on finding his own sound, as well as testing out various methods to push the project forward. This included what he calls sound hunting, aka using a field recorder to make his own samples to incorporate into his music. He would record things like a sound bathroom, birds and wind, crunchy leaves, and more. As his sound slowly evolved, the releases continued, including his debut album release on Gravitas in 2016 called Dream Atlas. The album featured a handful of collaborations with fellow Gravitas artists like Essex and The Digital Connection, plus a remix of the title track from none other than Closey. To promote the release of the album, 3 release parties were held in Boston, Austin, and Portland, Maine. Later on in the year, he released a remix of Kermode's track Trinket, as well as a single for a Gravitas compilation called Mykonos, a single for Wakan called The Chrome Knight, plus a split EP with Delta 9 called Dust, released on Mal Label Music. Moving on into 2017, he kicked things off with his only release for the year, a single with Christina Soto called Heavy. But even though he only had one release, his schedule of shows was the biggest ever, as he had been slowly but surely growing his brand for some time. This included festival appearances at Disc Jam, Wild Woods, Zen Awakening, and of course Great North for his 5th year in a row. On top of that was a slew of headline shows as well as supporting shows, including a show in Atlanta with Jade Cicada and Smigonaut, a show at the Black Box in Denver with Conrank, and what appears to be his first ever show with Charlesthefirst in Brooklyn. The following year in 2018, Of the Trees had a ton of new music, making up for the lack of releases the previous year. This included the Our Hero Returns EP, which was his first crack at self-releasing his own tracks.
If I were to start self-releasing music years ago, I don't think I would be where I am without doing my Gravitas releases, without their help. I don't think I'd be where I am without doing some stuff with Wakan, like things like that. Mm-hmm. But now that I've got that user base of people that like to consume my music, I think it's safe to not really worry about it anymore.
This was followed by the Pish Posh collab with Mr. Bill, plus 2 more collabs on Wakan, one with Toadface called Stone Monkey, and one with Freddie Todd called Getting This. He also had his final release on Gravitas, which was a collab with Zebler and Canty Experience called Let Me In, as well as a collab with Goddamn Chan, plus his self-released Harvest EP. It was a massive year for all fronts of the project, not just new music. He made his debut at Infrasound, Sonic Bloom, and Lightning in a Bottle. Once the new year came around, he embarked on a tour with Charlesthefirst early in the year for the Ascent Tour. And as far as business dealings go, 2019 was a huge year for Of the Trees because he signed with Madison House Management in April, and for those that don't know, Madison House co-produces Electric Forest, so he landed a slot for the following year in 2020. Unfortunately, Electric Forest was canceled that year due to COVID. He was also named an emerging dance artist to watch by Billboard, and he also made his Lost Lands and Wakan debuts, and even got to open for Spangle in Kansas City. As far as music for 2019, he had 4 new releases for the year, the first of which being another Freddie Todd collab on Wakan called Mental Schlug. This was followed by a tribute track to the late rapper Pippus, who had rapped on a lot of bass tracks over the years, but unfortunately passed away. Of the Trees and DMVU teamed up to produce the track, which featured Pippus vocals, and it was called Hollywood Alchemy. Towards the end of the year, Of the Trees put out another self-released EP called Tanglewood, which features the track Spanish Moss, which is a fan favorite. After yet another successful self-release, Of the Trees began to toy with the idea of starting his own record label to use his release strategies to help out other artists, but he didn't actually start a label right away. At the very end of the year, he closed things out by releasing a mixtape on Christmas Day called Odds and Ends. Now, this brings us to 2020, which, as you all know, was an interesting year for most artists as their whole world was shaken up, and this occurred at a time when Of the Trees was seemingly on the cusp of breaking through to a new level in his career. He had big milestones coming up, like his Electric Forest debut and a Red Rocks opening slot for Opio and Closey, both of which unfortunately fell through. But as crappy as the situation was, Of the Trees decided to make the most of it by taking on the huge task of learning how to make his own 3D visuals using Blender and After Effects. The idea behind this was to be able to control another aspect of the project, giving him the ability to create a cohesive audio-visual experience that takes his fans on a journey. He also started doing Twitch streams, and he made an appearance on the Mr. Bill podcast for his first ever non-text interview. He also released some new music, including a single with Pigeonhole right at the beginning of quarantine called Slowcraft. This was followed by a Conrank collab called White Noise Generation, plus a collab with Undrig called Warm Receiver. By the start of 2021, things certainly hadn't gone back to normal, but as the year went on, live music slowly started to return. Towards the end of the lockdowns, Closey asked Of the Trees to go on her Neon Jungle tour, and he wanted to debut his new self-made visuals on that tour, but unfortunately they weren't ready in time, though he still went on the tour. However, he did get to flex his new animation skills when he announced via promo video that his Tanglewood and Harvest EPs would be releasing on vinyl. He also dropped some new music, including a Zuckerberg edit exclusively available on Audius, plus his biggest release of the year, the Tale of Elagos EP. In an interview with EDM Identity, he disclosed that this was his proudest work to date. In a separate interview with Electric Hawk, he was quoted saying, "My usage of the word Elagos stems from the ancient Greek origin of elegy. In some ways, this project is indeed a mournful poem. It was written throughout the initial lockdown of quarantine, while a large portion of the life I previously knew was flipped entirely upside down. At the same time, the creature on the album cover is a humanoid mouse that I've named Elagos, the main character of the project's conceptual narrative. I'll leave anything else up to the listeners to dissect. It's more fun than me trying to explain it." So something that's interesting about this EP is that he actually commissioned the artwork before the music was finished, and he used the artwork as a guide for the music. This was also the first release on his newly launched label called Memory Palace, which was 2 years in the making, as he had previously toyed with the idea 2 years prior. The name Memory Palace was actually thought of by Essex, one of the Tree's good friends. It was originally going to be the name of one of his tracks, but he thought it was the perfect label name, so he willingly offered it up for Of the Trees to use. Moving forward into the latter half of 2021, he was back to playing shows more frequently, and luckily, he still got to open for Opio and Closey at Red Rocks for their show that had been postponed for a year and a half. Towards the end of the year, he was extremely excited to open for his good friend Charlesthefirst at the Caverns in Tennessee. But Charlesthefirst tragically passed away the day before the show, leaving Of the Trees to mourn the loss of his friend. Charlesthefirst was a pioneer in the bass music community and loved by all who knew him, so this was a tragic loss for the community, a true legend gone too soon. Many respects were paid to Charlesthefirst the following year in 2022, including a benefit concert that his friends played at to pay tribute to him. Of the Trees spoke about this afterward by saying, "I can't imagine myself being anywhere else in the world last weekend. The family that Charles brought together means the world to me, now more so than ever, and I can't believe what was accomplished within the walls of the Mission Ballroom that night. That was love I've experienced like no other. Rest in peace, my brother. I hope we made you proud. Thank you to everyone who had a hand in this. I somehow feel whole again." As for the rest of 2022, it was one of the Tree's biggest years ever. He went on tour with Rez, where he finally got to debut the visuals he had been working so hard on for the past couple years. He also got to show off these visuals at his headline show at the Ogden Theater in Denver, which took place in the midst of the tour with Rez. He got to play a ton of new festivals as well, including Bonnaroo, Shambhala, Okeechobee, Buku, Electric Zoo, and Sewanee Halloween. Plus, he also got to play as direct support for Rez Rocks. On top of that, he teamed up with Freddie Todd to form a new duo called Blap, with their debut show taking place at Cervantes Masterpiece Ballroom in Denver. He and Freddie go way back, as I've mentioned their previous collabs earlier in the video, but they have been on the same show lineups dating back as early as 2013. New music was released that year as well, including an Easy Baked collab called Sapped, plus a new original called The Owl Song. To close out the year, he kicked off the Codex Natura tour, which was his first major headline tour, which also featured his self-made audio-visual experience. The tour closed out 2022 and moved on into the early months of 2023, which was about to be a career-defining year for Of the Trees. One of his biggest shows to date took place in April, where he got to play back-to-back nights at the Caverns. During his set, he played Charlesthefirst track called For Now as a way of paying homage to his late friend at the same venue that he was set to perform at in late 2021 before his untimely passing. One of the lyrics in the song says, "I'll keep my head above the water for you," which seemed to be Of the Tree's way of expressing that he'll keep pushing forward despite the tragedy because it's what his friend would have wanted. Moving forward, he released 3 new tracks for the year. A joint single including Mascaria and the Everglade March VIP, plus a collab with Barclay Crenshaw called Blue Mile. Of the Trees continued to reach new milestones the rest of the year, including a sold-out show at Mission Ballroom and a sold-out Red Rocks debut towards the end of the year. The show sold out 8 months prior and featured a custom castle stage design, which was later converted to fit indoors for a New Year's Eve show at the Hollywood Palladium to close out the year. A ton of new career heights were reached in 2023, but this was simply fuel for even more explosive growth in 2024. He made a return to the caverns for John Summit's Experts Only weekend, and also released a song with John called Stay With Me, which made it onto John Summit's debut album. He also released a single with Sokka called Ghoul, which appeared on Sokka's Monomyth EP on Memory Palace. Towards the end of the year, Blap dropped their debut album called Volcanology. The following 2 days after the album release, Of the Trees returned to Red Rocks for back-to-back nights, the pinnacle showcase of his career to date. A custom cabin structure was built for the stage, which fully enveloped the visual aspect of the Trees brand when paired with tons of fog and otherworldly visuals. Of the Trees spoke about this in a recent interview with EDM.com where he said, "I looked up at the silhouettes of the famous rocks with my logos on them, at the several thousand faces staring back at me, at all the stars twinkling in the chilly November sky, and it all hit me super hard. We are really doing this shit." Here we are in early 2025, and Of the Trees is currently in the midst of his newest headline tour, the Moonglade Tour, and is looking forward to returning to Bonnaroo and Electric Forest this summer. The path that Of the Trees took to where he is now among the most esteemed bass music artists was the true definition of a grind. It's always interesting to see how long it takes an artist to make it big, as the results often vary greatly, with certain factors being out of the artist's control. Of the Trees was already well on his way to living the dream just a handful of years into his career, but it took him nearly another decade to reach these current heights that he always dreamed of. The grit and perseverance required to pull that off is admirable, as it takes a tremendous amount of self-belief and hard work to be able to make your dreams fully realized. But even with a decade and a half of the project in the books, it seems that Of the Trees is just getting started. Once again, I want to thank EARGASM for making this video possible, and if you're in the market for a high-quality pair of earplugs, be sure to check out the link in the description and use code AUDIO10 for 10% off your order.